I sat frozen on the antique sofa as my grandparents calmly explained, "Your cousins need the money more," while the grandfather clock ticked loudly in the corner, where family photos displayed my childhood spent caring for them every weekend for 15 years. The subdued lighting of Wilson & Associates law office does nothing to soften the tension vibrating through the room. The mahogany conference table gleams under recessed lights, the surface reflecting somber faces of my extended family gathered for the reading of my grandparents' will. 2 weeks since the funeral, the rawness of grief still evident in red-rimmed eyes and hushed conversations, though not all tears appear equally genuine. I sit with perfect posture in a chair midway down the table, the seat selected with deliberate neutrality. Not at the head where entitlement might be implied, not at the far end where insignificance is suggested. My black dress, conservative, appropriate, exactly what grandmother would have approved, betrays nothing of my internal state. Across from me, my cousins Tyler and Megan Blackwood exchange subtle glances, their expressions cycling between performative grief and poorly concealed anticipation. Tyler's new Rolex catches the light with each exaggerated gesture of sorrow. Megan's recently acquired designer handbag sits prominently on the table, a strange accessory for a will reading, but perfectly aligned with her constant status signaling. "Thank you all for coming today," Mr. Wilson begins, his voice carrying the practiced gravity of someone who delivers life-altering news as a profession. "We're here to discuss the distribution of Franklin and Eleanor Caldwell's estate according to their final wishes." My Aunt Patricia, my father's sister and mother to Tyler and Megan, dabs at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. "It's still so hard to believe they're gone," she murmurs, her voice carrying just enough to ensure everyone notices her performance. I remain silent, thinking instead of the countless hours spent at my grandparents' bedside during their final months, the medication schedules I maintained while working full-time, the medical bills I helped pay when their insurance claims were denied, the quiet conversations with grandfather about his legacy, his values, his hopes for how his life's work would benefit the family. Mr. Wilson adjusts his glasses and begins reading the formal legal preamble of the will, the archaic language washing over the room like a sedative. I notice Uncle Robert checking his watch, Aunt Patricia straightening her jewelry, Tyler scrolling through his phone beneath the table. Only my father seems genuinely present, his grief authentic and his attention respectful. "Now to the distribution of assets," Mr. Wilson continues, the shift in his tone recapturing wandering attention. "The Caldwell family home at 1452 Oakwood Drive, valued at approximately $875,000, along with all its contents and associated property." The room collectively holds its breath. "Is bequeathed to Tyler and Megan Blackwood, to be shared equally between them." My expression remains neutral despite the unexpected announcement. The family home had always been understood to pass to all grandchildren equally, with the possibility of buyouts among us. This single-generation transfer to only my cousins represents a significant departure from my grandparents' frequently stated intentions. Tyler and Megan exchange triumphant glances, their performance of grief momentarily forgotten in the glow of acquisition. Additionally, Mr. Wilson continues, the Caldwell investment portfolio, currently valued at approximately $1.2 million, is to be distributed as follows: 60% to Tyler Blackwood, 40% to Megan Blackwood. A heavy silence falls over the room. My name remains conspicuously absent from the proceedings. The Caldwell family business, Caldwell Construction, including all assets, contracts, and accounts receivable, is bequeathed in its entirety to Tyler Blackwood. Aunt Patricia clasps her hands in barely contained excitement, her facade of grief evaporating entirely. "Franklin would be so pleased to know the business will continue under family leadership," she declares, despite Tyler's complete lack of interest or experience in construction. My father shifts uncomfortably beside me, his confusion evident in his furrowed brow. "There must be some mistake," he says quietly. "My parents always said they intended to divide things equally among their grandchildren." Mr. Wilson clears his throat. "There is a personal note addressing this matter," he acknowledges, extracting a sealed envelope from the file. "Franklin and Eleanor instructed me to read this after the formal distributions were announced." He unfolds a single sheet of paper, the familiar stationery my grandmother favored for important correspondence. I recognize her letterhead, but not the shaky handwriting beneath it, so different from her usual precise penmanship. To our granddaughter Alexandra, Mr. Wilson reads, "We have given much consideration to the distribution of our assets. While we have always loved you dearly, we believe your cousins Tyler and Megan need these resources more than you do. You have always been independent and resourceful, with a promising career ahead of you. We are confident you will continue to succeed on your own merits. Your cousins require more support to establish themselves in life. Please understand this decision comes from love and our desire to help those family members most in need of assistance. We trust you will respect our wishes." The letter lands like a physical blow, each word precisely targeted to strike at the core of our relationship. The grandparents who raised me after my mother's death, who celebrated every achievement, who emphasized the values of hard work and family loyalty, now posthumously declaring that I need nothing while my perpetually underemployed, chronically irresponsible cousins need support. "So that's that," Tyler says, his tone carrying unmistakable satisfaction. Grandma and Grandpa knew what they were doing. Megan at least has the decency to appear slightly uncomfortable, though her discomfort seems more about the public nature of my exclusion than the exclusion itself. "When was this will executed?" my father asks, his voice tight with controlled emotion. Mr. Wilson consults the document. "The final version was signed approximately 3 months ago." 3 months ago, when grandfather's medication had been increased, when grandmother's lucidity had become increasingly intermittent, when my cousins had suddenly begun visiting after years of minimal contact. "Were there previous versions?" I ask, my voice steady despite the turmoil beneath. Mr. Wilson hesitates, professional ethics visibly warring with personal discomfort. "I'm not at liberty to discuss prior drafts in this setting." An interesting non-answer that confirms my suspicion. This wasn't the first will. This wasn't the plan they had described to me repeatedly over the years. "Alexandra has always been practical," Aunt Patricia interjects, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I'm sure she understands that Tyler and Megan simply need more assistance establishing themselves." I meet her gaze directly, my expression revealing nothing of my thoughts. "Of course, family has always been my priority." Tyler smirks, misinterpreting my response as submission. "We knew you'd understand, cuz. You've always been the reasonable one." Something flickers in my memory, grandfather's confused expression 3 months ago when Tyler had mentioned our arrangement during a rare visit. The way grandmother had looked to me with uncharacteristic uncertainty that same day, asking if I was still executor before Aunt Patricia had quickly changed the subject. "Is there anything else?" I ask Mr. Wilson, my tone measured and professional. He reviews the remaining documents. "Just some smaller personal items specified for various family members. Your grandfather's watch collection to Tyler, the family jewelry to Megan, the art collection to be divided between them." He hesitates. "There is a personal bequest to you, Alexandra, your grandmother's recipe book and her collection of family photographs." Recipes and photos, sentimental items with no financial value, while my cousins receive assets worth millions. The meeting concludes with Mr. Wilson explaining next steps for transferring titles and accounts. Tyler immediately begins discussing selling the family home. "To liquidate our asset," he says, as if the house where our grandparents lived for 50 years, where I spent every weekend of my childhood, is nothing more than a line item on a balance sheet. As family members gather their belongings, Aunt Patricia approaches, her expression a masterpiece of performative compassion. "Alexandra, dear, I hope there are no hard feelings. Franklin and Eleanor simply wanted to ensure everyone's needs were met." "I understand completely," I reply, my voice neutral. Family was everything to them. She seems relieved by my apparent acceptance, patting my arm before joining her triumphant children. My father remains beside me, his expression troubled. "This isn't right," he says quietly. "This isn't what they wanted." "I know," I respond, gathering my purse, "but right now isn't the time to discuss it." As we leave the law office, I watch Tyler and Megan already planning celebrations, Aunt Patricia basking in the reflected glory of her children's windfall. They believe the matter is settled, the assets secured, their manipulation complete. They have no idea that I spent 15 years of my professional life specializing in estate litigation. They think their performance has concluded successfully. They don't realize the curtain has barely risen on the real show. The digital clock on my desk reads 2:17 a.m. as I methodically sort through stacks of documents spread across my home office. The soft glow of my desk lamp illuminates years of financial records, medical reports, and correspondence. A paper trail of my relationship with my grandparents that tells a very different story than the one presented in that sterile law office yesterday. Sleep feels irrelevant when compared to the task at hand. This isn't emotional reaction, it's strategic response. While my cousins celebrate their windfall, I'm building a case with the same methodical precision I apply to my professional work. I start with the financial records. Neat folders containing 5 years of receipts, invoices, and bank statements. Each document tells part of a larger story. The in-home health care I arranged and partially funded when grandmother broke her hip 3 years ago. The specialized memory care support I coordinated and subsidized when grandfather began showing signs of cognitive decline. The household expenses I quietly covered when their fixed income proved insufficient against rising costs. All told, nearly $187,000 of my personal funds invested in their care and comfort during their final years. Funds I never mentioned or requested reimbursement for, because that's what family does. Or at least that's what I thought family does. I organize these records chronologically, creating a clear timeline of my involvement in their daily lives. Adjacent to this, I place a second timeline, documented visits from Tyler and Megan based on the caregiver's logs I insisted on maintaining. The contrast is stark. My name appears nearly daily for 5 years. My cousins' names appear sporadically until a sudden cluster of visits beginning 4 months ago. 4 months ago, just before the new will was drafted. My phone buzzes, a text from my father. "Are you okay? Couldn't sleep thinking about today." "Working on something," I reply. "We'll call tomorrow." I turn next to the medical records, copies provided to me as their healthcare proxy, a role I had assumed 5 years earlier when it became clear someone needed to coordinate their medical care. The progression of grandfather's vascular dementia is carefully documented, with cognitive assessments showing significant decline over the past year. Grandmother's records detail her increasing dependence on pain medication following her hip replacement, medication that affected her decision-making capacity. Most telling are the notes from Dr. Mercer, their longtime physician, expressing concerns about new family members making healthcare decisions contrary to established treatment plans. A specific notation from 4 months ago documents his alarm about changes to grandfather's medication schedule, coinciding with increased disorientation. I pull up my email history, finding the concerned message from their primary caregiver, Sophia. Mr. Caldwell seemed very confused after Tyler's visit yesterday. Kept asking if someone was trying to change the papers. Mrs. Caldwell was quite upset too, but wouldn't explain why. I had followed up immediately, of course, but by then Aunt Patricia had arranged for a new caregiver, someone recommended by a close friend, who turned out to be Patricia's bridge partner. Sophia was summarily dismissed despite 5 years of dedicated service. My objections were overruled by Patricia's sudden insistence on taking a more active role in her parents' care. The timing aligns too perfectly to be coincidental. Next, I review the correspondence, birthday cards, holiday notes, the handwritten letters my grandparents sent before their health declined. One envelope from 18 months ago contains a note in grandmother's distinctive handwriting, so different from the shaky script on the letter read yesterday. "We've updated our will, Alexandra. As we've always discussed, the family home and business will be divided among all grandchildren, with you as executor since you understand our wishes best. Tyler and Megan will receive financial assets to balance the value, since you've always loved the house and business most. We trust you to be fair." I place this note in a separate folder labeled Intent Documentation. Most valuable are the recordings, another practice I began when grandfather's memory started failing. With their permission, I had installed a simple recording system for important conversations, originally intended to help grandfather remember discussions about his care or finances. The digital files are securely stored on my encrypted cloud drive, organized by date. I pull up recordings from 5 months ago when they were still lucid more often than not. Grandfather's voice comes through clearly. Alexandra, when the time comes, you'll make sure the business goes to someone who cares about it, right? Not just selling it off for quick cash. My recorded response, I'll honor whatever you decide, grandfather. You know that. His reply, it's already decided. You're the only one who understands what we built. The others just see dollar signs. Another recording, this one from a family dinner 6 months ago that Tyler and Megan actually attended. Grandmother, we've worked our whole lives to build something for all of you to share. Tyler, about that, Grandma. Have you thought more about what we discussed? About how some of us might need more support than others? Grandmother, we've always believed in equality, Tyler. Alexandra has worked just as hard. Aunt Patricia's interruption. Mother, Alexandra has her career. She doesn't need the inheritance like the twins do. They're still establishing themselves. At 34 years old, with nothing to show for it but expensive tastes and a trail of failed ventures funded by periodic loans from various family members. I check my watch, 3:40 a.m. now. Despite the hour, I feel energized rather than exhausted. Each document building a clearer picture of what transpired during those final months. Not just a simple change of heart, but a systematic campaign to manipulate vulnerable elderly people into redirecting their estate. My laptop pings with an incoming email, a response to my discreet inquiry to a former colleague now working at the practice that employs Dr. Mercer. Records show Patricia Blackwood was added as a secondary healthcare proxy 4 months ago. Unusual paperwork filed by someone other than Dr. Mercer. Multiple prescription changes followed. Can talk more securely in person. Another piece falling into place. I open my desk drawer and remove one final item. A small voice recorder grandfather had given me during one of his more lucid days 3 months ago. Keep this safe, he had said, his eyes unusually clear and focused. Patricia doesn't know about it. Listen when the time is right. I had assumed it contained personal messages, memories he wanted to preserve. I hadn't listened yet, the grief still too fresh. But now, understanding the larger context, I press play. Grandfather's voice emerges, weaker than in earlier recordings, but determined. Alexandra, if you're listening to this, something has gone wrong. Patricia and the twins have been pressuring us to change everything. New will, new arrangements. They keep saying you don't need anything, that you're taking advantage of us. Eleanor and I know that's not true, but they come every day now. The new caregiver gives me pills that make it hard to think. Patricia takes papers away before I can read them properly. I've signed something, but I don't remember what. If it says we've cut you out, it's not true, not what we want. Find James Wilson. He has the real will from last year. This recorder, hide it. Patricia searches your things when you're not here. The recording continues, documenting multiple conversations between my grandparents and my aunt and cousins. Conversations where my elderly grandparents are clearly confused, where leading questions are asked repeatedly, where subtle threats about having to move to a facility are made when they resist. The final recording, dated just weeks before their deaths, captures grandmother's distress. I don't understand why Alexandra isn't named anymore. We always said, Franklin, didn't we always say? Patricia's voice interrupts. Mother, we've been over this. Alexandra has taken advantage of your generosity for years. The new will makes things right. Now take your medication and rest. I sit back in my chair. The evidence laid out before me in irrefutable detail. Not just a family disagreement about inheritance, but a coordinated campaign of undue influence, possible medical manipulation, and exploitation of vulnerable adults, against people who loved them, who trusted them, whose care I had dedicated years of my life to ensuring. The first gray light of dawn filters through my blinds as I begin organizing everything into a comprehensive file, not acting from emotion, but methodically building a case that will be impossible to dismiss. Each document, each recording, each medical record carefully labeled and cross-referenced. My phone buzzes again, Tyler this time, demonstrating his usual remarkable insensitivity. Having movers come to grandparents' house next week. Anything you want before we clear it out? thinking of listing with a luxury realtor. The family home where I spent every summer of my childhood. Where grandfather taught me to build my first birdhouse in his workshop. Where grandmother showed me how to make her famous apple pie in the kitchen with the blue tile backsplash she had selected so carefully. All to be cleared out and sold to the highest bidder. I don't respond to the text. Engaging now would be premature, revealing my hand before all pieces are in place. Instead, I make 3 calls, timing each to coincide with the beginning of the business day. First, to James Wilson's law office, requesting an urgent appointment regarding inconsistencies in the Caldwell estate execution. Second, to Dr. Mercer, citing my healthcare proxy status and requesting a formal statement regarding my grandparents' cognitive capacity during their final months. Third, to Michael Donovan, the most respected estate litigation attorney in the state, and fortunately, a former colleague from my early career. Michael, it's Alexandra Caldwell. I need your expertise on a case of undue influence and potential elder abuse. It's personal. His response is immediate and reassuring. Send what you have. I'll clear my morning. By 8 a.m., I've compiled, organized, and secured digital copies of everything. The physical evidence is arranged in labeled folders, ready for legal review. My approach isn't fueled by hurt or anger, though both emotions exist beneath the surface. This is strategic response, methodical compilation of facts that tell the true story. Tyler and Megan believe they've secured their windfall through manipulation and deception. They have no idea what's coming. Michael Donovan's office projects exactly the image a top-tier estate litigation attorney should maintain. Understated elegance that conveys competence without ostentation. The wall of law books behind his desk may be largely ornamental in the digital age, but they send a clear message to clients: tradition, authority, permanence. I sit across from him, back straight, emotions carefully contained as he methodically reviews the evidence I've compiled. 3 hours into our meeting, his expression has transformed from professional interest to focused determination. This is one of the most comprehensive cases of undue influence I've seen in 20 years of practice, he says finally, removing his reading glasses. The timeline alone is damning. The sudden involvement of previously absent family members coinciding perfectly with changes to healthcare providers, medication adjustments, and dramatic estate revisions. But is it enough, I ask? The question practical rather than emotional. The current will was properly executed, signed, witnessed, notarized? Michael's smile is subtle but confident. Proper execution doesn't overcome substantive defects. The medical records clearly document cognitive decline. The recordings establish undue influence and misrepresentation. The documentation of your consistent caregiving versus their abrupt appearance creates a compelling narrative. He arranges the folders with practiced precision. What I find most persuasive are your grandparents' own words, both in the recordings and their previous correspondence. Their consistent intent over years, suddenly reversing months before death, immediately following increased contact with previously uninvolved family members. Aunt Patricia will claim they simply changed their minds, I observe, that they saw my cousins needed more support. Yet that claim is directly contradicted by your grandfather's secret recording and your grandmother's documented confusion about your removal. Michael taps the folder containing the transcripts. The statement that you're taking advantage of them is particularly telling. There's zero evidence to support that assertion, and substantial evidence to the contrary. Your financial contributions to their care alone refute it completely. I nod, absorbing his analysis. What's our approach? Multifaceted, he replies, shifting to strategy. First, we file a formal contest to the will on grounds of undue influence and diminished capacity. This initiates the legal proceedings and puts the executor on notice. James Wilson, I clarify, the attorney who oversaw the will execution, who, interestingly, seemed uncomfortable with the proceedings based on your description. That's significant. Michael makes a note. Second, we submit a comprehensive evidence package to the probate court. Everything you've compiled, plus expert analysis of the medical records and authentication of the recordings. Timeline? Initial filing by tomorrow afternoon. Evidence submission within 10 days. Then we request an emergency injunction to prevent any disposition of assets until the contest is resolved. That won't go over well with my cousins, I observe. They're already planning to sell the house. Which is exactly why the injunction is necessary. Michael's expression turns more serious. Alexandra, I need to prepare you. This will get ugly. Family will attempts to rewrite elderly relatives' wishes often do. Patricia, Tyler, and Megan will likely respond with accusations, attempts to damage your reputation, emotional manipulation of other family members. I'm prepared, I assure him, my voice steady. This isn't about money. It's about honoring my grandparents' true wishes and ensuring their legacy isn't perverted by greed. He studies me for a moment. Most clients say that initially, but emotion eventually overtakes principle. You seem different. I've spent my career managing complex situations dispassionately, I explain. Emotional reactions rarely yield optimal outcomes. Good, because strategic thinking is essential here. He opens his laptop. Let's discuss specific tactical approaches and potential countermoves. For the next hour, we map out a comprehensive strategy, not just legal filings, but anticipatory responses to likely challenges. Michael's experience with contested wills provides insight into typical defense tactics, allowing us to prepare counters before they're even deployed. There's one more thing we should discuss, he says, as our meeting concludes. The current executor. James Wilson, I nod. My grandparents' longtime attorney, who, according to your grandfather's recording, has the real will from last year. Michael's expression turns thoughtful. We should approach him directly, outside the formal proceedings. Wouldn't that be inappropriate? Not if framed correctly, a professional courtesy, expressing concern about potential liability he may face for overseeing a will execution, when there were clear indications of cognitive impairment and undue influence. I consider this approach. He seemed uncomfortable during the reading, particularly when my father asked about previous versions. That suggests personal knowledge he's constrained from sharing ethically. Michael makes another note. I'll handle that contact personally. Sometimes attorneys communicate more freely with colleagues when potential professional liability is at stake. As I prepare to leave, Michael asks one final question. How much does your father know about what you've compiled? Nothing specific yet. He knows something was wrong, but not the extent of the evidence. Consider briefing him fully. Family allies can be valuable, and he may have additional insights or evidence we can incorporate. I nod, gathering my purse. I'll call him today. Leaving Michael's office, I feel neither vindicated nor satisfied, merely focused. This is just the beginning of a process that will require sustained strategic effort. My phone buzzes with a text from Megan. Hey cuz, Tyler and I were thinking of having a family dinner Saturday to discuss next steps with the estate. Hope you can come despite everything being so awkward now. The transparent attempt at normalizing their acquisition amuses me, as if a family dinner can smooth over their systematic manipulation of vulnerable, elderly relatives. Saturday works, I reply simply. Intelligence gathering opportunities shouldn't be wasted, and their false confidence will make them careless. On the drive home, I call my father, arranging to meet at his house that evening. The conversation needs to happen in person, with the evidence physically present. His support isn't necessary for legal proceedings, but his testimony about our grandparents' previously stated intentions would strengthen our position. At home, I create a simplified version of my evidence file. Key documents, clearest recordings, most obvious timeline discrepancies. My father isn't a lawyer or business strategist. He needs the emotional impact of the most compelling evidence without being overwhelmed by technical details. That evening, seated at his kitchen table, I watch his expressions cycle through shock, grief, and finally cold anger as he reviews what I've prepared. They did this to my parents? His voice trembles slightly. Patricia orchestrated this? The evidence suggests a coordinated effort, I confirm, keeping my tone measured despite his visible distress. Medication changes, caregiver replacement, sudden regular visits after years of minimal contact, all culminating in a complete revision of their estate plan, contrary to their long-stated intentions. He shakes his head, staring at the transcript of grandfather's secret recording. Dad knew something was wrong. He was trying to tell us. He did tell us, I correct gently. We just found the message a bit later than intended. My father looks up, his expression hardening with resolve I've rarely seen from him. What do you need from me? Your recollections of any conversations with your parents about their estate plans, documentation of their consistent intentions over time, and potentially your willingness to testify about Patricia's sudden involvement in their care after years of minimal interest. She's my sister, he says quietly, the family complexity evident in his tone. She's also someone who potentially took advantage of your parents' diminished capacity for financial gain, I remind him. This isn't about family disagreement. The evidence suggests elder abuse, medical manipulation, and exploitation. He nods slowly, determination replacing hesitation. I have letters from Mom over the years. She always talked about how the business should go to you since you were the only one who showed any interest in how it actually worked, and photos from family gatherings, showing who was actually present in their lives. Those would be helpful, I acknowledge, especially from before their health declined. He stands abruptly. I'll get them now. They're in my office. While he searches, I receive an email from Michael. Had preliminary discussion with James Wilson. As suspected, he has significant concerns about the circumstances surrounding the final will execution. Meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning. We'll update afterward. Another piece falling into place. Wilson's cooperation could potentially short-circuit lengthy legal proceedings. My father returns with a shoebox full of correspondence, decades of birthday cards, holiday letters, informal notes. Mom kept carbon copies of important letters, he explains. Old habit from her days as a school secretary. She'd send the original but file the carbon copy in her personal records. We spend the next 2 hours sorting through this unexpected treasure trove of documentation. The pattern is unmistakable. Consistent references to equitable distribution among grandchildren, specific mentions of me taking over the construction business, since Alexandra is the only one who ever showed interest in how buildings actually get built, and frequent concerns about Tyler and Megan's financial irresponsibility. One letter from just 7 months ago is particularly direct. We worry about Tyler and Megan's spending habits. We've decided to place their portion of the financial assets in a structured trust, rather than direct inheritance. Alexandra will help oversee this as executor since she understands our concerns about their impulsive decisions. A structured trust, completely absent from the current will, which gives them unfettered access to substantial liquid assets. This is exactly the kind of documentation we need, I tell my father, setting this letter aside for immediate scanning, clear evidence of their actual intentions before outside influence intervened. His expression reflects both satisfaction and sadness. Will this be enough to fix things? It significantly strengthens an already compelling case, I assure him. Michael believes we have strong grounds for having the current will invalidated. And then what happens? If we succeed in invalidating the recent will, the court would likely revert to the previous valid will, the one grandfather referenced from last year. I organize the most relevant letters into a separate stack. Based on the evidence, that version divided assets more equitably and reflected their actual wishes. My father nods, his expression thoughtful. You know this isn't just about the inheritance, right? For me, it's about honoring their actual wishes. About not letting Patricia and the twins manipulate them in their vulnerable state. I understand, I assure him. The principle matters more than the assets. As I prepare to leave with the relevant documents safely secured for scanning, my father asks one more question. Have you talked to Uncle Robert about this? Patricia's husband? He was always more level-headed than she was. An angle I hadn't fully considered. Number I assumed he was aligned with Patricia. Their marriage has been mostly separate lives for years, my father reveals. He spends most of his time at their lake house, while she stays in the city. He might not even know the full extent of what happened. Another potential ally, or at minimum, another source of information about what transpired during those critical months. I'll reach out to him, I decide, carefully. On the drive home, I mentally adjust our strategy to incorporate these new elements, the additional documentation from my father, the potential approach to Uncle Robert, the promising development with James Wilson. My phone rings through the car speaker. Tyler, his tone artificially casual. Hey cuz, just wanted to check if you're coming Saturday. Megan's making her famous lasagna. I'll be there, I confirm, matching his casual tone while revealing nothing of my preparations. Great, and hey, we were thinking of bringing the realtor to look at Grandma and Grandpa's house Sunday. You know, just to get a professional opinion on value. If there's anything sentimental you want, you should probably grab it soon. The calculated cruelty of this suggestion, that I should hurry to collect mementos before they liquidate my grandparents' home, would be infuriating if it weren't so strategically revealing. They have no idea that within 24 hours, a formal contest will be filed, and an emergency injunction will prevent any asset disposition. Thanks for letting me know, I reply neutrally. No problem, family has to stick together, right? Even through awkward situations. After disconnecting, I pull into my driveway, mentally reviewing next steps. Tomorrow, Michael files the initial contest. I prepare for Saturday's family dinner, an intelligence gathering operation rather than a social event, and we await James Wilson's response to Michael's approach. Tyler and Megan believe they're proceeding with their plans unimpeded. They have no idea that by the time Saturday's lasagna is served, their entire inheritance scheme will be officially challenged, legally frozen, and on its way to public exposure. The formal notice of will contest arrives at precisely 2:15 p.m. on Friday afternoon. Timing strategically selected to disrupt my cousin's weekend plans while giving them just enough time to panic before tomorrow's family dinner. Michael's secretary confirms delivery to all relevant parties, Tyler and Megan at their respective addresses, Aunt Patricia at her Riverside Drive condominium, and James Wilson at his law office. I'm reviewing case precedents in my home office when the first reaction arrives. A furious text from Tyler. What the hell is this legal notice? Are you seriously contesting the will? I don't respond. Emotional engagement at this stage would be counterproductive. 3 minutes later, Megan calls. I let it go to voicemail, then listen to her message. Alexandra, we need to talk about this immediately. This is completely inappropriate and frankly shocking behavior. Call me back right away. The manufactured outrage is precisely what Michael predicted. I forward the messages to him with a brief note, initial reactions arriving, exactly as anticipated. His response is immediate. Excellent. Maintain your silence until tomorrow's gathering. Let them stew. My father calls next, his tone concerned rather than angry. Patricia just called screaming about legal notices. Are you okay? Perfectly fine, I assure him. This was the planned next step. Their reactions are expected. She's threatening to cut me off from the family, he says, with a hint of dark humor, as if she controls that too. Their position is weakening, I observe. Strong reactions indicate they recognize the threat. The emergency injunction is confirmed by late afternoon. No assets from my grandparents' estate can be transferred, sold, or otherwise disposed of until the will contest is resolved. The luxury realtor visit Tyler had planned for Sunday will not be proceeding. At 6:30 p.m., the most significant development arrives via email from Michael. Meeting with James Wilson exceeded expectations. He provided copies of the previous will executed 14 months ago, along with his personal notes, expressing concerns about the circumstances surrounding the final revision. He has formally recused himself as executor due to ethical concerns about the testamentary capacity of the deceased. The court has appointed an independent temporary executor pending resolution. Wilson is prepared to provide sworn testimony about Patricia Blackwood's unusual behavior during the final will preparation. This is even better than anticipated. Not just Wilson's cooperation, but his active support. His recusal as executor creates a significant crack in the foundation of my cousin's inheritance scheme. I forward the update to my father with a simple note, progress. By evening, Aunt Patricia finally contacts me directly, not with a call or text, but through her attorney. The formal letter attempts to sound conciliatory, while containing veiled threats. This unfortunate misunderstanding could have significant repercussions for family harmony, considerable legal costs that will ultimately reduce the estate's value. Hope you'll reconsider this divisive action before irreparable damage occurs. I forward this to Michael as well, who responds, standard intimidation attempt. They're worried? Saturday morning arrives with another development. Uncle Robert calls, his voice carrying genuine confusion rather than anger. Alexandra, what exactly is happening? Patricia is behaving strangely, and I've just received legal documents I don't entirely understand. I've filed a formal contest to Grandma and Grandpa's will, I explain calmly. There's substantial evidence suggesting the final version was executed under conditions of undue influence and diminished capacity. A long pause follows. I've been at the lake house for months. Patricia said your grandparents wanted to simplify their estate plan. That's all I knew. Would you be willing to meet to review the evidence I've compiled? It's quite comprehensive. Another pause. Yes. I would like to understand what's happening. This doesn't sound like Franklin and Eleanor. We arranged to meet Sunday. Another piece falling into place. Another potential ally emerging. By afternoon, preparations for the evening's family dinner are complete. I select an outfit that conveys confident professionalism rather than emotional distress. Navy blazer, tailored pants, minimal jewelry. My appearance will convey that I'm addressing a business matter, not a family grievance. Michael's final advice before I leave. Remember, this is an intelligence gathering operation. Let them talk. Let them threaten. Record everything discreetly. The more they reveal about their actions and motivations, the stronger our case becomes. I arrive at Megan's modern downtown loft precisely on time. The tension is palpable before I even enter. Raised voices audible through the door fall suddenly silent when I knock. Tyler opens the door, his attempt at a normal greeting undermined by the tight anger in his expression. Alexandra, come in. The scene inside confirms our strategy is working. Aunt Patricia pacing by the windows, Megan nervously arranging and rearranging table settings, legal documents spread across the coffee table. Their carefully planned family discussion has already devolved into crisis management. Thank you for the invitation, I say pleasantly, as if unaware of the chaos I've created. Cut the polite act, Tyler snaps. What the hell do you think you're doing? I set my purse down carefully, the recording device inside already active. I'm ensuring our grandparents' true wishes are honored. Nothing more, nothing less. Their wishes were perfectly clear, Aunt Patricia interjects. The will spelled everything out. The will executed when they were medically compromised, after you replaced their longtime caregiver, adjusted their medications, and suddenly began visiting after years of minimal contact. I maintain eye contact, my voice steady. That will... The room falls silent. The first confrontation has begun, and I've seized immediate control of the narrative, exactly as planned. The silence following my calculated statement lasts precisely 4 seconds before Aunt Patricia recovers, her features arranging themselves into practiced indignation. How dare you make such accusations, she hisses, fingers gripping her wine glass so tightly I'm surprised it doesn't shatter. We were caring for my parents while you were busy with your career. Interesting perspective, I reply, removing my phone and setting it on the table. My calendar shows I visited them 312 times over the last 2 years. The caregiver logs show you visited 17 times, until 4 months ago, when your attendance suddenly increased to 3 times weekly. Tyler steps forward, attempting to use his height as intimidation. What exactly are you implying? I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. I maintain perfect composure, pulse steady despite the hostility surrounding me. Fact. Grandfather's medication changed after you began regular visits. Fact. Their longtime caregiver was replaced with someone connected to Aunt Patricia. Fact. Their cognitive capacity was already significantly diminished when the new will was executed. Megan's facade cracks first. You don't understand, she says, her voice trembling slightly. They wanted to help us. They saw we needed support to establish yourselves, I finish for her. At 34 years old, after multiple failed ventures funded by family loans, that wasn't their consistent position for the previous decade. People change their minds, Tyler insists, though uncertainty has crept into his tone. They do, I agree, though it's peculiar when that change directly contradicts years of stated intentions, coincides with cognitive decline, and follows a campaign of isolation from previous caregivers. Aunt Patricia attempts to regain control of the narrative. This is absurd. My parents made their decisions independently. The will is legally binding. James Wilson no longer believes so, I inform them. Watching their expressions carefully, he's recused himself as executor due to concerns about testamentary capacity, and has provided copies of the previous will to the court. The impact is immediate and visible. Tyler's face drains of color, Megan sinks onto the sofa, and Patricia's composure falters completely. Wilson had no right, she stammers. That's a breach of professional ethics, I suggest. Actually, attorneys have an ethical obligation when they believe documents were executed without proper capacity or under undue influence. Tyler recovers enough to attempt intimidation again. This will destroy the family. Is that what you want? The family was compromised the moment our grandparents were manipulated during their final months. I meet his gaze directly. I'm simply ensuring their actual wishes are honored. Patricia changes tactics, her voice softening with artificial concern. Alexandra, dear, I understand you're hurt. Being excluded is painful, but creating these conspiracy theories won't bring them back. Conspiracy theories, I repeat thoughtfully. Would you use the same term for grandfather's own recorded statement explaining how his medication was being adjusted to make signing papers easier? Or grandmother's documented confusion about why I had been removed from the will? The reference to recordings visibly startles them. Patricia's wineglass finally does slip from her fingers, splashing red across the cream carpet. You recorded them, Megan asks, horrified. That's invasive. With their full knowledge and consent, I clarify, a practice we began when grandfather's memory started failing, to help him remember important conversations. Tyler and Patricia exchange a panicked glance that confirms another suspicion. They had no idea such recordings existed. Those won't be admissible, Tyler argues, his law school dropout status suddenly evident. You need consent from all parties. In this state, only one party consent is required, I correct him. And as their medical proxy and primary caregiver, I had full authorization to maintain records of their care and conversations. The doorbell interrupts the increasingly tense exchange. Megan opens it to find my father standing there, a development none of them expected. Dad? Patricia's voice rises in confusion. What are you doing here? Supporting my daughter, he replies simply, moving to stand beside me, and honoring my parents' actual wishes. The family divide is now physically manifest. Patricia, Tyler, and Megan on one side. My father and I on the other. The balance of power has shifted palpably. You've turned him against me, Patricia accuses, finding a convenient target for her anger. He's reviewed the evidence independently, I reply, including grandmother's letters to him discussing their estate plans quite different from the final will. My father nods. Mom and Dad were consistent for years about their intentions. This sudden change doesn't reflect what they wanted. Tyler attempts a different approach, his tone suddenly conciliatory. Look, maybe we can work something out between us. Without lawyers. Come on, we're family. Family who conspired to manipulate elderly relatives for financial gain, I observe. But yes, a resolution is possible. Return to the previous will's provisions, the one executed when they still had clear testamentary capacity. And what exactly did that will say? Megan asked cautiously. Equal division of financial assets. The business to Alexandra with appropriate offsets. The house to be shared or sold with proceeds divided equally. Structured trusts for both of you rather than lump sums. My father's detailed knowledge clearly surprises them. Patricia's expression hardens. Unacceptable. The current will stands. Then so does the legal contest, I reply calmly, along with the evidence being submitted to the probate court next week. Evidence that includes what exactly? Tyler demands, attempting to gauge the strength of our position. Medical records, caregiver logs, recordings, correspondence, financial contributions, visitation documentation. I list each category methodically. And witness statements from caregivers, physicians, and now James Wilson himself. The comprehensive nature of the evidence visibly impacts their confidence. The family dinner they planned as a means to manage my exclusion has transformed into a demonstration of how thoroughly outmaneuvered they are. This isn't over, Patricia warns, her voice low with barely controlled fury. You're right, I acknowledge. The court will make the final determination. unless, of course, you reconsider your position. As my father and I leave, the divide we've created remains evident, not just in the battle lines drawn over inheritance, but in the fundamental values exposed. Those who would exploit vulnerable elders versus those determined to protect their true wishes. The lasagna remains unserved on the counter, forgotten in the confrontation. Exactly as I expected. The conference room at Donovan Legal Associates feels like neutral territory despite being Michael's domain. Deliberately selected for the mediation meeting as a power play. My cousins and aunt enter with their attorney, Raymond Prescott, a man whose reputation for aggressive tactics is at odds with his carefully cultivated grandfatherly appearance. I sit beside Michael, my father on my other side, with Uncle Robert completing our side of the table. His presence is perhaps the most significant development since our Sunday meeting, where reviewing the evidence had transformed his confusion into cold anger directed at his wife's manipulations. Let's begin, Michael suggests once everyone is seated. We're here to discuss resolution of the contested will for Franklin and Eleanor Caldwell. Prescott leans forward, his voice carrying practiced reasonableness. My clients maintain that the final will accurately represents the deceased's wishes. This contest is causing unnecessary distress and depleting estate resources. Interesting framing, Michael replies, especially given the evidence of diminished capacity and undue influence we've compiled. He slides copies of our evidence summary across the table, a strategic selection of the most compelling documentation rather than the comprehensive file, enough to demonstrate our position's strength without revealing every detail of our case. We've reviewed Ms. Caldwell's claims, Prescott dismisses. Speculation and emotional response to a disappointing inheritance. Michael's smile carries subtle warning. Then you should review more carefully. The medical records alone establish significant cognitive decline, combined with the documented medication changes, caregiver replacement, and sudden involvement of previously absent family members. The pattern of undue influence is difficult to dismiss. Tyler shifts uncomfortably as Prescott skims the summary, his expression revealing concern despite his professional demeanor. Most compelling, Michael continues, are Franklin Caldwell's own recorded statements, describing confusion about documents he was signing, and expressing concern about medication, making it hard to think clearly. Would you like to hear those recordings now? Prescott confers quietly with Patricia, whose composure has noticeably deteriorated since entering the room. This remains contestable evidence, Prescott argues, though with less certainty. Single-party recordings. Made with full consent as part of an established caregiving protocol, Michael counters smoothly, with witnesses to that consent, including healthcare providers. I observe the subtle shifts in body language across the table, Tyler's growing tension, Megan's increasing distress, Patricia's barely contained anger. Their position is weakening with each revelation, exactly as planned. Additionally, Michael continues, we have James Wilson's sworn statement regarding his concerns about testamentary capacity during the final will execution, along with his retention of the previous will, executed when both Franklin and Eleanor Caldwell were demonstrably of sound mind. Prescott attempts another approach. Even if there were concerns about the circumstances, the expressed intention to provide more support to Tyler and Megan was clear. Was it? Michael queries, opening another folder. These letters from Eleanor Caldwell to her son span the 5 years preceding her death. They consistently describe an equal division among grandchildren, with structured trusts specifically designed to prevent Tyler and Megan from making the same financial mistakes repeatedly. That intention directly contradicts the final will's unlimited distribution. Uncle Robert speaks for the first time, his voice tight with controlled emotion. Patricia claimed her parents wanted to simplify their estate plan. She never mentioned eliminating Alexandra entirely or removing the trust protections for our children. Patricia's composure finally breaks. They needed help establishing themselves. Alexandra has her career, her financial stability, which I built while simultaneously caring for your parents, I interject, my voice calm despite the accusation. Spending my own money to ensure their comfort and proper care while you visited perhaps 3 times a year. Michael slides another document forward, a financial summary of my contributions to my grandparents' care over 5 years. The total exceeds $187,000. Alexandra's financial support, Michael notes, stands in stark contrast to the narrative that she didn't need inheritance because of her career success. That success was partially sacrificed to provide care that others in the family declined to offer. Megan begins crying softly, the first crack in their united front. We didn't know about the money, she admits, ignoring her brother's warning glance. Aunt Patricia said Alexandra was being compensated from Grandma and Grandpa's accounts. Another misrepresentation, Michael observes, easily disproven by financial records. Prescott, recognizing his client's position deteriorating, attempts damage control. Perhaps we could discuss a potential compromise solution. We've been completely transparent about our position, Michael responds. Return to the provisions of the will executed 14 months ago, when both Franklin and Eleanor Caldwell were of sound mind and free from undue influence. And those provisions? Prescott inquires cautiously. Michael details the previous will's terms: equal division of financial assets, the business transferred to me with appropriate compensation to my cousins, the family home either shared or sold with proceeds divided equally, and structured trusts for Tyler and Megan, rather than unrestricted distributions. The previous will also named Alexandra as executor, Michael adds, a position she is willing to reassume to ensure all beneficiaries are treated according to Franklin and Eleanor's actual wishes. Tyler finally speaks directly to me, desperation evident in his tone. You'd still control everything. The business, the executor position. The business I've actually worked in and understand, I remind him. The executor role I'm qualified for through direct knowledge of their intentions. And unlike the current will, you and Megan still receive substantial inheritance, just with the protections they always intended. Prescott requests a private conference with his clients. As they exit to a separate room, Michael leans closer. They're considering settlement. Prescott recognizes the weakness of their position. The structured trust will be their primary objection, I predict. They want unrestricted access to liquid assets, which is precisely what your grandparents sought to prevent, my father observes. When they return 20 minutes later, their demeanor has visibly shifted. Patricia resigned, Tyler sullen, Megan still tearful. The power dynamic has transformed completely from our first confrontation. My clients are willing to accept the previous will's provisions with 2 modifications, Prescott announces. First, an independent executor rather than Alexandra. Second, accelerated distribution schedules for the trusts. Michael glances at me, silently seeking my position. I'll accept an independent executor, I respond after brief consideration. The trust distribution schedules remain as originally structured, quarterly payments rather than lump sum access. Patricia begins to object, but Prescott quiets her with a gesture. He recognizes the strength of our position and the wisdom of accepting the compromise. Those terms are acceptable, he confirms. We'll prepare the formal settlement agreement. As the meeting concludes, the atmosphere carries neither victory nor defeat, but the heavy weight of revealed truths. Family relationships permanently altered, manipulations exposed, trust irrevocably damaged. Tyler and Megan exit without making eye contact. Patricia pauses at the door, her expression a complex mixture of anger and grudging respect. You've won, she acknowledges stiffly. I hope it was worth destroying the family. The family was compromised when our grandparents were manipulated, I reply calmly. I've simply ensured their true wishes will be honored. As they leave, Michael confirms what we both already know. This is the right outcome. The settlement is substantially what your grandparents intended, without the cost and stress of prolonged litigation. The showdown has concluded exactly as planned, not with emotional confrontation, but with strategic resolution that honors my grandparents' actual intentions. Justice through methodical execution rather than emotional reaction. Exactly as they deserved. The conference room at Wilson & Associates feels different today. No longer the site of betrayal, but of resolution. Sunlight streams through tall windows, illuminating the polished mahogany table where the final settlement documents await signatures. 3 weeks have passed since the mediation, each day bringing another small victory as our agreement transformed into binding legal reality. I arrived precisely 15 minutes early, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that projects quiet authority rather than celebration. This isn't about triumph, it's about restoration. James Wilson greets me with subtle respect. Our relationship transformed since that first reading. Everything is prepared exactly as agreed, he confirms, arranging the documents with methodical precision. The independent executor has reviewed and approved all terms. The executor, Justice Margaret Chen, retired from the state Supreme Court, had been a strategic selection. Her reputation for fairness and attention to detail made her impossible for Tyler and Megan to challenge. "Thank you," I reply simply, taking my designated seat. My father arrives next, followed by Michael. We exchange quiet greetings as the atmosphere gradually fills with anticipation. The door opens again, admitting Tyler, Megan, and Aunt Patricia, accompanied by their attorney. Their expressions range from resigned acceptance to barely suppressed resentment. No one speaks beyond necessary pleasantries. Justice Chen calls the meeting to order, her commanding presence bringing immediate focus. "We're here to formalize the settlement agreement contesting the will of Franklin and Eleanor Caldwell," she begins. "All parties have reviewed the documents and agreed to the terms. Is that correct?" Affirmations circle the table. "Then I'll summarize the key provisions before signatures," she continues. "Financial assets to be divided equally among the 3 grandchildren. Caldwell Construction to transfer to Alexandra Caldwell, with appropriate financial offsets to Tyler and Megan Blackwood. The family residence to be sold with proceeds divided equally. Trusts established for Tyler and Megan Blackwood with quarterly distributions, rather than lump sum access." Tyler shifts uncomfortably at the trust stipulation, but remains silent. The fight has left him, a realization, perhaps, that this outcome is indeed what our grandparents had intended. Additionally, Justice Chen continues, "Personal items will be distributed according to the list attached as Exhibit C, with sentimental objects divided as specified by the independent assessment." The assessment, conducted by a neutral appraiser, had cataloged every item in my grandparents' home, from valuable antiques to cherished photographs. The process revealed another layer of my cousin's character. They had claimed items of monetary value while expressing no interest in family photographs or handwritten recipe cards. "If there are no objections, we'll proceed with signatures." The signing process unfolds with formal precision, each party applying their signature to multiple documents, each page initialed, every signature witnessed and notarized. The mechanics of resolution replacing months of conflict. When the final signature is applied, Justice Chen reviews the complete documents once more before nodding with satisfaction. The settlement is now binding. Distribution will proceed according to the timeline in Appendix A. Patricia stands abruptly, gathering her belongings without making eye contact. "Let's go," she instructs her children, her voice tight with controlled emotion. Megan hesitates, then turns to me. "I didn't know about your financial contributions to Grandma and Grandpa's care," she offers awkwardly, "or how often you visited them." "I didn't do it for recognition," I reply simply. Tyler says nothing, following his mother toward the door. At the threshold, Patricia pauses, turning back with a final bitter observation. "I hope you're satisfied." "This isn't about satisfaction," I counter calmly. "It's about honoring their wishes. It always was." After they leave, the remaining participants complete the necessary administrative details. As we prepare to depart, James Wilson approaches, his expression carrying something like admiration. "Your grandparents would be proud," he says quietly, "not just of the outcome, but of how you achieved it, with integrity and determination rather than malice." "Thank you," I reply, genuinely appreciative of his assessment. Outside the building, standing in the clear autumn sunshine, my father places a hand on my shoulder. "It's over," he observes, with evident relief. "This part is," I acknowledge. "The rebuilding comes next." Michael shakes my hand firmly. "One of the cleanest resolutions I've seen in a contested will case. Your strategic approach made the difference." As they depart, I remain momentarily on the steps, feeling neither triumphant nor vindicated, but simply at peace. The settlement doesn't erase what happened during my grandparents' final months, but it ensures their legacy will be preserved as they intended. Looking toward the future, I envision Caldwell Construction continuing under my guidance, the structured trusts providing for my cousins without enabling their worst tendencies, and the family home, though sold, remaining symbolically shared through equal distribution. Justice accomplished not through emotional reaction, but through methodical strategy. Not through vengeance, but through restoration. Exactly as my grandparents would have wanted. 1 year after the settlement, I stand in the newly renovated offices of Caldwell Construction, surveying what has been preserved and what has changed. The company my grandfather built from nothing now thrives under my direction, its legacy secured rather than dismantled for quick profit. The anniversary wasn't planned, simply a coincidence of timing that brings the journey into sharp perspective. 12 months of methodical rebuilding, strategic growth, and careful stewardship of what was nearly lost. My office retains grandfather's old desk, restored rather than replaced, while integrating modern technology and efficient design. A perfect balance of tradition and progress, exactly as he would have appreciated. A knock at the door interrupts my reflection. My project manager enters with updated blueprints for the Riverside development, our largest contract since I assumed leadership. The revisions are complete, she explains. We've incorporated the sustainable elements while maintaining the projected budget. Excellent, I respond, examining the detailed plans. This is exactly what grandfather would have wanted. Innovation without sacrificing quality. After she leaves, I open my calendar to review the quarterly trust distribution schedule. Tomorrow, Tyler and Megan will receive their latest payments. Structured support that provides stability without enabling impulsive decisions. The arrangement has produced unexpected results. Tyler, faced with limited access to capital, has finally discovered sustainable employment with an architecture firm. His natural charm, channeled into client relationships rather than manipulation, has apparently made him a valuable team member. According to my father, he's even taking night classes to complete the degree he abandoned years ago. Megan has undergone a more dramatic transformation, the structured financial support giving her freedom to pursue meaningful work rather than chase status. She now teaches art at an elementary school, her creative talents finally finding productive expression. Our relationship remains distant, but has evolved from hostility to cautious respect. We exchange brief, cordial messages regarding trust matters, but maintain separate lives, a boundary that serves everyone's best interests. Aunt Patricia remains the exception, her bitterness apparently undiminished. She and Uncle Robert have separated, another casualty of the revelations about her manipulation of her parents. He lives permanently at the lake house now, occasionally joining my father and me for dinner, slowly rebuilding family connections that had withered under Patricia's influence. My phone lights up with a calendar reminder. The Memorial Garden dedication at Westfield Senior Center is scheduled for this afternoon. One of the most meaningful projects I've undertaken with my portion of the inheritance. 2 hours later, I stand beside the garden's central fountain, watching as residents of the senior center explore the newly completed space. Wheelchair-accessible pathways wind between carefully selected plantings, benches positioned to catch morning sunlight, a gazebo offering shelter for conversation or quiet reflection. The bronze plaque reads simply, "The Franklin and Eleanor Caldwell Memorial Garden, a place of peace, connection, and dignity for all who gather here." This, more than the legal victory, more than the business success, embodies what my grandparents truly valued, creating spaces where people are treated with respect, where community flourishes, where beauty enhances daily life. As the ceremony concludes, an elderly resident approaches, her walker moving steadily along the smooth pathway. "You're Franklin and Eleanor's granddaughter, aren't you? I can see them in your face." "Yes," I confirm, touched by her observation. "They would have loved this," she assures me, gesturing toward the garden. "Eleanor always said gardens were the perfect gift. Beauty that grows and changes, that invites people to participate rather than just observe." Her words capture precisely what I've sought to achieve, not just preserving my grandparents' material legacy, but extending their values into new expressions. That evening, reviewing final documentation for the trust distributions, I paused to examine a photograph on my desk, my grandparents on their 50th anniversary, their expressions reflecting the deep connection that sustained them through decades. I had found it in a forgotten album while clearing their home, this moment of genuine joy, preserved by chance. The family home had sold quickly, its proceeds divided as agreed. Yet before the sale, I had methodically documented every room, preserving the spatial memory of where life events unfolded, where traditions were maintained, where family history resided. Those records, along with carefully selected mementos and photographs, now serve as touchstones of connection, physical links to values that transcend material possessions. My father calls as I'm completing the trust paperwork. "Just checking in," he says warmly. "I drove by the senior center garden today. It's wonderful, Alex." "Thank you," I reply. It feels right, creating something permanent that reflects what they valued. "They would be proud," he affirms, "not just of what you've built, but of how you've done it, with integrity, with purpose." After we disconnect, I finalize the quarterly distribution authorizations with my signature, not merely fulfilling a legal obligation, but honoring the balanced approach my grandparents had always intended: support without enabling, opportunity without irresponsibility. As evening settles, I close my grandfather's desk, the smooth wood reflecting generations of careful stewardship. The contested will that once threatened to dismantle this legacy now exists only as a footnote in legal records, its distortion of intent firmly corrected. What remains isn't just the equitable distribution of assets, but the preservation of principles, the values that defined my grandparents, now extending into new manifestations, touching more lives, creating ripples beyond what they might have imagined. Their true legacy secured not through emotional reaction, but through strategic restoration, not through vengeance, but through vision, exactly as they deserved.